What is up, everybody? This is Phil here with a composer breakdown of one of my latest pieces. And I'm really excited to do this one because this comes as a request, or at least this is the conclusion to an awesome little thread that occurred in the Film Scoring Network for Composers and Filmmakers forum that is on Facebook. It is due to a conversation between myself and, let's take a look here. I'm looking at the original post. Yeah, Sander de Gans. And if I messed up the pronunciation of your name, I am so sorry, but thank you so much for your kind words. And I'm really excited to do this breakdown for you and the rest of the composition community, and for anyone that is even mildly interested in how this stuff is done. I hope that you find some type of benefit from this breakdown and that you all enjoy it. So, a few housekeeping notes before we get started. First and foremost, when I play this piece, you're going to see a bounced version of the song first. The waveforms are going to be a little lower. I have then a mastered track. So the point of what I'm doing here is to show you my mix chain and to show you how I have everything bussed and routed to create a more realistic sounding arrangement. And so that's going to be mostly what this entails. If you want to know more about mastering and stuff like that, that's something that I'll probably do in a separate video. But you can at least see which plugins I'm using in my mix chain, because even though the levels would be lower than the mastered track, except for volume, there's very little difference between what's mixed and what's mastered. The mastering is simply just bringing up the volume of everything. The mix, you want to make sure that there's enough headway, so that way you get all the sounds, you get all the good stuff mixed and ready to go. It's kind of like cooking, and then the mastering is the icing on top of the cake. So we're going to be covering the meat and potatoes, the nitty gritty, the stuff that makes it taste the way that it does. And then the icing on top of the cake is the mastering, which is just, the last piece of the flavor. So I'm going to stop blabbing. And I'm going to minimize myself here. I am running Studio 1, rather, from Presonus, version 4. It's an awesome DAW. I love it. I know that it is comparable to Pro Tools. I know a lot of producers out in the community have actually switched from Pro Tools to Presonus, which is awesome. So, and by the way, I'm really excited to be posting this in here because I just love the fact that there's so many composers who are interested in making music and sharing with the community, and I thought I would put my 2 cents in here, and hopefully this will benefit some of you who are doing the same thing. I certainly was very happy to come across the settings and the plugins and the revelations that I did with this mix in particular, which is the whole reason why I posted it in the group and the whole reason why I'm doing this breakdown. So, here we go. The name of the piece, which you can also find on SoundCloud, is called City of Chaos. For those of you who do not know, I am, of course, a big fan of a few composers that are out there. But I would say that this is very much in the vein of Stravinsky, Johann Johansson, Hans Zimmer, and a little flavor of John Williams and James Horner. So, given that, let's go ahead and play the bounced version of the track. And then once we listen to that, we'll go over all the stuff that's happening down here. And in this area, right? Oh, I'm blocking it. Hold on. Let me move myself down to here. This area right here, the plugins that I'm using, because most of the stuff that's in my mix chain is free. Yes, free plugins or stock plugins. Go figure. Anyway, so at least in the mix chain here, there's a couple of other things happening in the buses and stuff like that. But what I plan on doing after playing this for you is to reverse engineer what's happening. So go from the mix chain through the buses, through each individual track, rather than go from bottom to top. We're going to go top to bottom. So, okay, I'm going to stop blabbing and start playing. Here we go. City of Chaos. Boom. All right, I hit my commentary microphone with my hands because I was imagining conducting a real orchestra, which that is the true dream of any composer, is to have this done, have their compositions done by a real orchestra. But in the meantime, whoops. Okay, there we go. In the meantime, making things sound as realistic as possible with sample libraries is going to suffice. So anyway, all right, so I'm going to hide the bounce track so that way there's no confusion. All right, hide that. Cool. It has disappeared. Haha. I'm also going to hide this commentary track because I do not need it. It's only going to confuse people. Okay. So, what do we got going on here? Okay, so obviously we have all of these instruments, all this stuff that are routed to different buses and different chains, but we're gonna start with the mix chain, which I'm circling right up here. So what do I have going on here? I have a saturation knob from SofTube that I put right at the beginning of the mix chain. Why do I do that? It's to bring out a bit of the highs and the lows that would otherwise be buried in the mix. There is something to be said for adding just a little bit of distortion, just a little bit of fizz and noise underneath your mix, so that way it sounds more natural. It has a tendency to bring things out. There's also a term that's called dither. I want you to look up all that information on your own there, to find out what a little bit of saturation, what a little bit of dither can do for your mix. It can just bring out certain things in the mix that weren't there before, and it definitely makes it sound more natural to the human ear. So that is the very first thing that I have going on in my mix. And so the other thing that is completely and utterly magical is the fact that the saturation knob that I'm showing you from SofTube, that is free, or at least it's been free. It was free when I got it initially. Now, the next one that I'm going to show you, and I'm just going to give this away now. This was this right here, this plugin right here was the thing that turned the light bulb on for me, that brought me to the conclusion that I was able to make with the quality of this specific mix. So I have used this plugin in the past, but it is only just now that with this setting that I currently have, I've been able to bring out the best in this mix, or at least to this point. Obviously, it's not perfect. Obviously, every single every single soundtrack album is mixed differently. I know that the soundtrack to Braveheart, James Horner, beautiful arrangements, beautiful compositions. The way that it was recorded, there is so much distortion and so many weird things that are happening in the mix. It's obvious that they did analog recording and probably didn't have a lot of time to to get it done. So that's a perfect example of how even professional mixes and arrangements can still have, you know, a bit of imperfection. So given that, the Quadracom 64-bit mastering processor. If you go search this online, you will find this for free. It's amazing. It has compression. It's a 4-band compressor. So with that said, you can compress the low frequencies, the low mids, the high mids, and the highs. What I really love about this plugin is the Transient Vitalizers. So you can take the high. What I usually do here is, you know, compress, try to put as much compression that's, you know, necessary on the low mid frequencies, because that's where mud usually happens, as most of you probably know. Low mid, 300 to 500 hertz. That's the place where you're going to get a lot of, which you want to avoid at all costs, or at least balance it at all costs. So that's why I have most of the compression happening there. Now, so that's the way that I have it compressed. The Transient Vitalizer, I like bringing out the in the high frequencies and the high mid frequencies, and, you know, reducing that in the low areas, so that way it doesn't, so that way the mix, because when you think of it, the frequency spectrum, what's going to travel more? The longer waves, the slower waves. That's the reason why when you roll up to a party and the doors are shut, you hear boom, 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 boom. But as soon as you open the door, boom, 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 everything comes flying out the door, all the frequencies. So that's why I feel it is important to prioritize transient vitalization in the high frequencies and the high mid frequencies, and to define what transients are. Transients have to do with the sharpness and the quickness at which the attack. And you know, correct me if I'm wrong or if my terminology is a little off here, but it increases the attack and the of a compression on waveforms. So it's going to bring out the higher frequencies there. It's going to make them attack faster. All right, so, and then the equalizer. What I have currently here, it's something to keep in mind. I'm bringing down just a tiny bit, only about negative 1.6 dB on the low frequencies. I am bringing the low mid frequencies slightly up, since the compression back in the chain is dampening the muddiness. I'm you know, balancing that back with this equalizer here. The other thing that you want to watch out for is too much harshness in your high mid frequencies, which is why I have that of all the frequencies here, that I have that most reduced, and then bring it back up for the high frequencies to get that sizzle, especially in your brass and your cymbals and all that good stuff. Now, with that said, I have the punch off, because I don't want it to, you know, over accentuate. I don't want it to affect the RMS and the master chain negatively. And then I also have, you know, you can switch back and forth between stereo and I guess mono. Now, keep in mind, like, this means that it's just affecting both the left and right channels. It doesn't mean that it's putting everything into mono. It just means that it's compressing everything between the left and the right channel equally. And then K20. Now, this has to do with metering. You've heard of RMS metering. You've heard of LUFS. You've heard of LU. K20 is a part of that. Now, for whatever reason, And I know that, and I'm going to show my ignorance here in mixing and mastering. For whatever reason, when I throw on K20, there's something about setting it to K20 within this mix chain and having it at the levels that I have here that just balance everything out. It's exceptional. I'm so happy with how everything sounds, and I'm actually going to play it just to give you an example here. And I'll try to switch back and forth as well. All right, here we go. Up. And you can see that it's and something else to mention. Everything is the M is has to do with the M and the S have to do with the compression, I'm pretty sure. And then the T has to do with the transients. So you can see what's going on there. Alright. So. And I'm not quite sure what the inertia and the balance do, but it sounds good, so I'm keeping it there. I'm assuming the balance has to do with just making sure that everything is equalized in some way. It's probably some type of dither or some type of saturation, further saturation. Inertia may be the same thing. This may just be like saturation and dither settings right here. Okay, so that is a huge piece of the puzzle of the mix chain, and I'm going to switch back and forth between K20 and not K20. Here was this. As you can see, not as much compression. What I feel it does is it just makes the one thing that it does, and it's so slight, it brings out the nyah in the brass. It brings out the bite in the brass by setting it to K20 and having the settings as low as they are. Because otherwise, I would have to bring up, if I had K20 off, I would have to bring up all those levels in order for it to be at the same level. So I really dig that. And of course, the input and output are set in such a way that there's enough headroom for the master chain, which I'll show you what that is and briefly go over what I use for my master chain. Right now, the master chain that is currently going through for this broadcast is slightly different than slightly different than what I have for the mixed version of this piece, which you can find on SoundCloud. But I'll show you that is Isotope Ozone 7. And again, I am using this just for this broadcast, the settings that are currently here. The settings within the master chain through Presonus in the project that I have are a little different, but Ozone 7 is great. Any of Isotope's products are fantastic, and I'll play a little bit here to show you the metering of that. So you can see this is the final step here. And usually I'll have the dither on just a little bit, usually at 24 bits. And I will also want to make sure that my RMS does not go beyond, or it averages out between -8 and -5. Maybe if you have a sub hit here and there, it might go to -4 to -3, but you want it to be average in between -8 and -5. And you also want to make sure that the balance between your frequencies, between both the left and right channel, are good. Now, cool. All right, so, and I totally forgot about the fat channel and the OTT 6.4. OTT, another Okay, yeah, so I kind of went out of order there. That was like part of the master chain. That was just like a side note to what's going on here. So to review, SofTube, to add just a little bit of saturation. Quadracom, this is my baby. This is what makes it happen, okay? So actually, we're going to turn this off. We're going to turn off OTT and Fat Channel just to give you an idea of what it sounds like just going through that. Okay. So that's just going through the saturation knob of the Quadracom. All the mix buses and everything like that. Now, let's move on to OTT. Turning that on. Love this damn compressor. I have the depth set at 5%. I have the time set at 0 because I want to get most out of the transients. I have the output gain only at -1 just to add just a little bit more headroom for that master chain that I was talking about just a few moments ago. So, you have upward compression, you have downward compression. I don't want to press down everything too much. I do like to have the upward compression to bring things up. And I feel that these settings, the way that I have it set, at least for this chain, seems to work out pretty nicely. So, cool. And then the fat channel, the whole point of this, it's a tube. 1 second. It's a tube compressor. I like using this stock Studio One tube compressor to just catch a couple of peaks. You know, I bring up the gain to make it so that way it sits, like the mix chain sits at about -5 RMS, and then catches any undue peaks so that way it's not overwhelming the master chain. So yeah, that's so let's see that in action. Okay, you can see it. It's just moving just a tiny bit. It's just catching just a few teeny tiny little peaks here and there, just to add just a little bit of dampening, so that way it doesn't overwhelm your final master, your final mix. So, good to go there. Fabulous. Okay. So we went over the mix chain with an aside to the master chain, which I apologize if that was confusing. Just a review, okay? We've got saturation. We've got the Quadracom with its compression, its transient vitalization, its equalizer, its dither and saturation settings, its compression and metering settings. The fact that it has a lower input and output than the final metering, which would be at 0 dB or -0.01 or 0.2 or whatever. Okay, we have the OTT. Love this. This is also free, by the way. Love this compressor. It's fantastic. It's really a piece of gold right here. That in combination with the Quadracom is awesome. And then, of course, you have the stock tube fat channel compressor just sitting at the top of the mix chain to make sure that it catches any undue peaks here and there. And if you have a DAW that has a tube compressor like this, this is something that you can use at the end of your chain, for sure. And those other 3 plugins, free. They are free. They are free. So I'm literally using free plugins and a stock plugin in my final mix chain before it goes to mastering, which then it routes to Isotope Ozone 7. Also, something else to keep in mind as well when you are mixing is something that's called phase. We want to, and I've heard from the community that phase is not as big of a deal anymore because we listen to things in stereo on a regular basis. So with that said, though, I have done a lot of A/Bing of different mixes of soundtracks that I love and adore, and that I'm sure most of you do as well. And I have noticed that when I put it into my DAW here, that the phase is bouncing. You see like how it's here. I'll show you really quick. It usually bounces around anywhere between 0.4 and 0.1. You never wanted to go to the other side and have it be like, you know, you don't want the blue hanging out over here. Now, there's obviously different DAWs and different ways to monitor the metering, but there are some sample libraries that are out of phase, and that can create problems, especially if you're listening to it on just a phone speaker, which you know, this is why I use something called the Binaural Pan, which you can use anywhere in your mix chain. Like you could even like add it to, for example, up here if you wanted to, just to make sure that the width of your mix isn't too wide or too narrow and it's sitting within phase. Now, I'm lucky in the sense that right now my mix is averaging a pretty good phase and not going out of phase a lot. It may go there because of the weird effects, but there, it's right back. So, all right. But enough about phase, enough about Binaural Pan. We've gone over the mix chain that's going on here. Now, as you can see, my tracks are being bounced to different buses. So I have brass going to the brass bus, strings going to the string bus, and legato strings, all this stuff. They're routing to bus chains that are over here. Now, I don't want to get into all the specifics of, you know, the EQ for the brass bus and the EQ for the string bus. What I do want to emphasize, though, is the importance, especially if you're doing an orchestral mix, an orchestral mock-up. If you want it to sound more realistic, you want to make sure that your reverb is routed in a proper way. Otherwise, you're going to run into issues. You want to make everything sound like it's in the same room. That is a huge piece of the realism orchestral puzzle, at least in my opinion. So, given that, we're going to take a look at what I've got going on here. I have all the buses, all the instrument buses here that are actively being used. Now, some of these, disregard this stuff unless it's being used. You can see that I have binaural pans on that too, just to, like, you know, set it. We'll get to that. Okay, I don't want to get off track. Reverb. Okay, I am routing to these two reverbs right here. Okay, and right now I'm using a stock plugin called Open Air, which is modeled off of Air Studios, I believe, which is awesome. And there's all kinds of presettings and effects. And right now I have Wormhole 1, which is an awesome setting that's not too saturated, that I have most of the buses routing to, and then a large European hall to catch some of the other stuff too. Makes for a very big sound. Now, I'm going to mute the reverb here, and we're going to see how it sounds now. See, it sounds dry. It sounds like there might be like some stock reverb within the sample libraries that's just helping with, like, you know, some tail reverb ambience, but it sounds dry. Still sounds okay, but it sounds dry. It sounds like it's like a cookie that has like really good chocolate chips, but like the rest of the cookie's like, it's like giving you cotton mouth and stuff like that. It's like, yucky. So that's the reason why you want to route all of your instruments through a reverb chain, and here's the other thing. Like the buses are going to the main compressor. That's your main mix compressor. Okay? And only a little bit of this signal is being routed to the reverbs. As you can see, like the level here, what's the level? Okay. it's at negative 20.8. That's what the brass is. That's what's going to the reverb. So I'm going to play really quick so you can see that's what's going to the reverb right now. Okay, so like what we're listening to are the levels at which these channels are being routed to the reverb. And that's just the room itself. So when you put it all together, it sounds like it's all in the same room. Super important to have reverb, a reverb bus that all of your mix buses can route to. So that way it sounds like it's all in the same room. Very important. Now, hopefully that makes sense. And obviously, guys, if you have any questions or any critiques about this breakdown, or if anything is confusing, just let me know. And then also, something else that I found very revolutionary for at least for my mixing game is that I did add binaural pans to each of the instrument buses. And what binaural pan does is, as I said before earlier, is it increases or decreases the width of your stereo signal. So technically, I could put the brass in mono if I wanted to. Now, why do I have them set in different ways? Why do I have them set at different widths? Well, what I'm trying to do is to further emphasize and articulate the accuracy of where each of the instruments would sit in a real orchestra. So, for example, the brass, they're not usually on the outside of the orchestra, on the edges of the orchestra. They're like, you know, somewhere like here and here. So that's why I have the width set the way that I do. The strings are a little bit wider. They're usually along the sides of the orchestra. And you also want to make sure that, because every sample library is different, you want to try to figure out where each instrument section sits, which will determine what you do with your binaural pan. Now, let's look at the woodwinds. The woodwinds usually sit in the middle of the orchestra, which is the reason why I have the width set so low, so that way it makes it sound like they're actually in the center. One issue that I addressed in earlier mixes that was pointed out to me by a colleague of mine is that my woodwinds sounded too wide. The placement of them were too wide, which brought me to using binaural pans to make the instruments sit in a different way, in a certain specific way. So the point being is that if you do have a stock plugin within your DAW that allows you to increase and decrease the width of your stereo channel, get it, especially if you're doing orchestral mock-ups, because it's really, really going to help in the realism of your sound. So is the reverb. That's a huge part of it. No matter what you decide to do with your mix chain, making sure that everything's routed to the same reverb, and then that is going to, and that's getting all mixed together with the main compressor. That's the most important thing. Now, by the way, one thing I do want to bring up, though, is that I have the main compressor. I have a couple of things going on routing to the mix chain, which I do not have the reverb going into the main compression. I actually have the reverb outside of the main compression. I feel like it allows the reverb to breathe a little bit more than the instruments, because I want the instruments to be, I want the attacks and the releases to be set in a certain way, as where reverb is all about the wow. So that's why both the main composition and the main reverb and the reverb are routing to the main mix channel, rather than routing the reverb to, say, the main comp. I don't want to do that. And I don't think I even can, for whatever reason. So, which probably has to do with the way that I have the bus set up. So there you go, everybody. There you go. Without getting into crazy detail about the EQ and the other stuff that I use, that is hopefully going to answer Sander's questions about the realism and how it's done. Some honorable mentions. I want to give a huge shout out to Project Sam for their free orchestra. This damn sample library is so comprehensive and awesome. This is free for anybody who's running Contact. You can run this. It's amazing. I love the fact that they have a sub hit in the Wild Winds. Here, I'll show you the quality of this one. There's a freaking sub hit in the Wild. I don't even know what that is. What woodwind creates that sound? But I love it. It's fantastic. I also absolutely love the quality of the tutti hits. Awesome. Just awesome. What an amazing ad that it just adds so much awesome dimension to sample libraries that one already has. So I will also link the other sample libraries that I'm currently using in this mix. It's a mix between, of course, Project Sam. Again, kudos for making such an amazing free orchestra. Awesome stuff. A couple of stuff from East West. I've got a female choir going here. I've got sticks from them. If I decided to expand on this a little bit more, I'd probably use the legato strings. I've got a gong patch from them going on. I'm using a free percussion instrument called War Drums from, let's take a look, Supreme Samples. That's a great free one. And then the rest of what I'm using here mostly, other than Project Sam and East West, is a mix between Palette and Sonoscore's The Orchestra Complete. That is what I'm using for my chain of stuff here. Oh, and the gorgeous Sordino violins by Project Sam, yet again. Awesome stuff. Very, very good stuff. Let's go to the brass. Of course, most of this is between Palette and Sonoscore. All great patches, all great sample libraries. But I want to bring your attention to a free plugin from Performance Samples. All right, can I expand it? Come on, there we go. And, oh, come on. Well, anyway, Angry Brass Horns, Trumpets, and Trombones. That is a free legacy sample library that comes from Performance Samples. And just to give you an idea of how they sound and how awesome they sound, come on, play. There we go. They add some really nice layering. Now, why do I have that? Oh, that's weird. Something's going on there. Something's wonky with my mix. But anyway, you at least got to hear the quality of the horns there. And I absolutely love layering my brass with those angry horns, trumpets, and trombones from Performance Samples. So those are the honorable mentions for the sample libraries. I hope that everything was clear here and that some of you got some takeaways from this breakdown, that you found it useful. The big takeaways, at least for today, is that you can have a really great sounding mix with free plugins and stock plugins with your DAW. And I will put links in the description of this video for all of those. You also can get a lot more realism out of your sound by routing all of your instruments with through mix buses, and then taking those mix buses and adjusting a send signal to 1 or 2 reverb patches to make them all sound like they're in the same room. Super, super important. and makes for a lot more realism. So, and hopefully that was proven to you today. Hopefully you enjoy what you heard. I'll also put a link in the description of this video of the final mastered track. And thanks so much for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it useful. And again, my name is Phil Freeman of Major Fifth Productions. And I will hopefully see you again in the next video. Take care until then. Bye-bye.